Mhm.
I am so excited to introduce Lynsea Coy, the founder and curator of Coy & Co. Oh my God. Why? See, I shouldn't have told you I was going to edit out the mess ups. I'll make a blooper reel
You,
because this is already.
you don't have to do the other part. Coy & Co is fine.
Like, I want to say it because not everybody will know who you are. So I'm going to do it. And I'll leave it in because it's a blooper. Okay. Take 3. So excited to introduce Lynsea Coy, the founder and curator of Coy & Co. Curatorial Floral, Portland's premier sustainable florist. I did it. Hi, Lynsea.
Hi.
How are you?
I'm so good. Just getting ready for the big part of this year's wedding season. It's happening.
Yes. So start by telling me about yourself and then how you got started and just about Coy & Co. in general.
Sure. So, as you said, I'm Lynsea. I am the owner and operator of Coy & Co. I'm also the Sustainable Floristry Network Ambassador for the United States. I'm one of 7, which is very exciting.
That's amazing. I didn't know that.
That's a newer thing. It happened like a month ago. It's a big deal to me. Like I don't know. It's exciting for me. It's definitely something that I just never imagined would happen. Because the other people who are ambassadors for this program are like legacy geniuses. So it's amazing. But yeah, and I started basically in like community farming and started just kind of selling flowers in a little flower stand on the weekends while I had a bunch of other full-time jobs. And people liked it. And I started to get into the industry, learned a lot about how not so sustainable this industry is, and thought I'd give it a shot, doing it the most sustainable way I could possibly imagine. Was told a lot of times that it's not possible. And then I said, ooh, you shouldn't have said that because now I really want to prove it's possible. And 5 years later, we're a full-scale brick-and-mortar flower shop, wedding flowers, classes, everything, you name it. That's what we do.
So what is the most important thing about what you do? And I think I know what you're going to say. And then tell me about how you do it.
Sure. So yes, of course, the most important thing would be the sustainable aspect of it. And more than anything, it would be my relationship with my farmers, because how I do what I do cannot be done without my relationship with local farmers. Sustainable floristry is, you can learn a lot more about it on the Sustainable Floristry Network website. But basically, at least how we do it at our shop is we sell 100% locally grown florals, foliage. We use locally made ceramics and vases and locally made ribbon and compostable ribbon. And we don't use any dyes, bleaches, paints, preservatives. No flower foam, which I'll talk more about later. And it's really important to me that if I'm in an industry that is profiting off of the planet, that we're making sure that that planet is gonna be there in the next 7 years. So
Seems a little relevant, right? Like it would
yeah.
be really nice if we had a space to continue, not only just to live literally, but also to like thrive creatively.
Yeah, exactly.
So what is your favorite part of the creative process? I can imagine that, when you're designing, there's also that element of how do we please the client? How do we build whatever it is without some of the mechanics, which I think, talk about that too. If you're missing some of those modern but very wasteful mechanics that a lot of florists use, kind of how do you bridge the gap there? And then what's your favorite part of creating?
Yeah. Well, what's wonderful about what I do is the clients who come to me are pretty trusting. I would say like 9 times out of 10, the clients who I meet with they're like, I love your stuff. Here's my color palette. Make it incredible. And I go, okay. And then I do that, and it's great. And I'd say like the best part of the creative process is actually being on farms with my farmers, and picking out like exciting little pieces that the client might not expect. And I'd say, like, just like everybody else, it's always the event day, the wedding day, that is the best part, because you get to see it all come about, and I get to like shock and delight my clients and their families, and it's really wonderful. And then also, like, the best part is, again, that shock, but just the shock of the simplicity of how I do it. The operative word of your question is modern mechanics, because flower foam, for example, didn't become popularized and considered essential until the 80s. So we've been doing floral design for as long as humans have been around, and it's not necessary. And in fact, like, the alternative is incredibly simple and easy. And so often I have workshops in here where I'm like, okay, you all came about to learn how to do this. Here it is. And they all go, that's it. And I go, that's it. All right. Good talk. You feel like that was a good waste of your time? Yeah. All right. Have some wine,
But I think it's so important to show folks that they can also just rely on their own creative process sometimes. And it's really interesting, actually, that you bring up the 80s, because I talked in the last episode of this podcast, I stumbled across an article that The Atlantic put out a few weeks ago that was talking about wedding sprawl, and how the idea of getting married used to be like one day. It used to be like, all right, we're going to a wedding, our friends or family are getting married, and we shall arrive and they shall get married. And then that was the end of it. It was over, and everyone said congratulations and went on with their lives. And then in the 80s, we saw this huge demand for multi-day events, for luxury events, and not including cultural events, where like cultural weddings where they were already multiple day as part of that, but like more of an American based thing. And so it's interesting that like some of those mechanics also came around at the same time. There's definitely like, it's all on purpose, right? Like, that, we started to see some of those things. So then this leads me into my next question. And actually, will you first just talk about what floral foam is and how people use it? Because I think a lot of folks think they might know what it is, but if you haven't seen it and you haven't literally put your hands on it and like smooshed it, you don't really understand what it is.
Yes. So, flower foam is a phenyl formaldehyde compound. It's basically a compacted brick of microplastics. It was invented and is currently being sold by the Oasis company, which is an American company. It wasn't really planned to be something for flowers. It just was a product, and they were like, how do we use this? How do we sell it? Let's find a bunch of different industries to sell it to. They've tried to sell it to like sidewalks, like put it in our sidewalks, put it in aquariums. If you go to their website now, they have an entire research section where they're just trying to figure out where to put it and how to sell it to other industries. So it definitely was never something that was essential for our industry. Basically, how it's advertised and how industry standard florists are suggesting it be used is basically you soak this brick of compacted powder overnight, and then the next day you let it drain out, and then you jam a bunch of flowers in it. And the idea is that makes the flowers last longer, that you can hang it from the ceiling, that you don't need a vessel. However, the thing about microplastics and flower foam is those little particles get clogged into the stems. So you're actually not getting any more longevity or any more hydration there. The point is that you want flowers in a water source, and that doesn't mean flower foam. In fact, most of the time it's counterintuitive. It's not helping with longevity. It's expensive. It's horrible for the environment. And it's not biodegradable. It's not reusable. And there was a study done recently of industry standard florists who use it, and they found that I think like more than 60% of florists were either pouring it down their drain in their sink, or they were just crumbling it up and putting it into their garden. So directly into the watershed. Because there's so much misinformation around what it is. Because it's green, the assumption is that it's something natural, or it's something that you can use and you can put in your garden, and it's going to help with hydration. None of that is true. It's toxic to handle. It's toxic to breathe in. There's a big like trend online where you can, like you said, smoosh it with your hands, pour glitter on it, and make it, it's ASMR. I would suggest anyone who's doing that wear gloves, because it is a phenyl formaldehyde compound, and it can kill you, and it can cause cancer. So
And like nobody wants to hear formaldehyde literally ever. Like that's not a thing that we want to hear. We know it exists, we know what it's for. It's not a thing that, you know, those of the living variety really want to hear, especially when you are like coming in contact with a physical thing that's also potentially near you eating.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Eating, you know, most people have like elderly folks and children at their weddings. You also have a lot of people, what I've been talking with a couple venues about is that oftentimes you're going to have a lot of people who are working there who don't know what it is. And so, and sometimes florists don't clean up at the end of the event. I'd say that that's more often than not. And so sometimes the venues and the people who are working there are left to clean this up, and they don't know this product that they're touching or working with. So they bring it home, they bring it into the kitchen, they touch it, they don't wash their hands because, you know, whatever. The main thing about the floral industry that a lot of people don't know is that it's a basically almost completely unregulated industry. So it's our responsibility to self-regulate, but that's not gonna, you know, that's not happening, and it's probably not going to happen. And so basically that means that there are no, like, you don't need a license to become a florist. You don't need most of the products that are being sold. There are no kind of like FDA standards, or like even the Department of Agriculture only licenses and regulates businesses and products that are either rooted plants or edible plants, something that you're selling to eat or something that you're selling to grow. So since cut flowers are neither of those things, nobody is checking to make sure that the chemicals that are being treated with it, that all of the products that are associated are safe to handle, safe to touch, nothing. And so most of the time we're just going based off of what the companies are saying. And we know what happens when we go off of what the people who are profiting are saying about the safety of their products.
Generally, not very good. It's generally
No.
anything that's sort of left to be self-regulated. We as humans have not shown any sort of prowess in being able to regulate selfly. That is
Yes.
for sure. Wow, that's so, I had no idea about that either. So then,
Yeah.
I mean, that leads perfectly into my kind of next question, and you've been sort of answering it, but I'm going to ask it again. So how is being sustainable important in weddings? What is the direct impact that you have? And then I also want you to talk a little bit about your day of process, because one of the things that came to mind when I asked you to come on to interview was just how different your day of and hands-on approach is. And I find it like wonderful and fascinating. And I like hanging with you. I like getting to hang with you for the whole time, but I want you to talk a little bit about that. And then also, you know, what are some things when folks are on the journey of choosing a florist and, you know, wanting to keep these things in mind? What are some things to watch out for and to kind of keep in mind as they're selecting their florist?
Sure. So in terms of why sustainable forestry is important for weddings, there's, so many reasons. I'd say for me right now, what I've been focusing on lately, I just taught a seminar on this. It would be about the venues that they are hiring these vendors to go out to. Most of the time, these venues are outdoor. They're at vineyards and, different, forests, national forests, hiking, all kind of different natural spaces. And those venues are unaware of who the vendors are and what the vendors' sustainability policies are. And so since you're the one who's hiring these vendors, ask about their sustainability policies, because a good example is I was at a wedding last year, and I had a big, beautiful installation that I love so much. This vineyard had a lot of amazing pollinators. The thing about pollinators is they forage for pollen, and they do not discriminate between the flowers and pollinating plants that are already on the property and the ones that you've brought into the property. So I have a beautiful video of my installation that's on this great frame being just covered in gorgeous bumblebees that are rubbing their little butts in all my flowers. And all I could think about is, gosh, I'm so happy that I didn't spray paint those. Gosh, I'm so happy that I didn't, use flower foam or, spray some sort of like preservative on it, because bees are bioaccumulators. They're bringing all of those chemicals back to their hive. And then those pesticides and different chemicals that are being brought with them are accumulating in their hives and their honey. So, it's the effect that your florist has is much larger than they realize, than the venues realize, than anybody realized. So a lot of what I do and my goal as the Sustainable Floristry Network Ambassador is to just get the word out And just to say what you need to watch out for is just like that they have a sustainable, policy at all. But there are so many questions you can ask them where they're getting their flowers, not just where they're getting them, but where they're grown. We do have florists who will say, I get my flowers locally, as in I get them from a wholesaler that imports them internationally. Ask them how they define local. The USDA defines local as 400 miles within the place that it's grown, and that's all the way out to the other side of Idaho. We at our shop define local as within 100 miles, which is just above Eugene. So ask them questions, just so many to the point that it feels stupid. If you're working with a vendor that cares, they won't have a problem answering those questions, and they might be a little excited to answer them.
Well, and they'll be prepared to answer them for sure, right? Like they will have an answer. And I think that's something that, like, preparing folks with questions when they're interviewing their vendors is so important, because how we respond, you can tell so much in what we know and what's important to us based on how we respond. You're absolutely right. So then talk to me about your process during the day and sort of the like day of management and the teardown piece and all of that, because I find that totally fascinating as well.
Yeah, I'd say part of my process is about sustainability, and part of it is just about like deeply loving what I do and loving like the other vendors and my clients. And a lot of it is just I just love what I do. But I mean, I get up early as all heck.
All heck out.
All heck out, usually around 4 a.m. I'm usually doing a lot of the work the day before. It depends on the size of the wedding, but say this is a full-size wedding that's offsite, I'm doing as much as I can ahead of time the day before. My alternative to flower foam that I'm using is chicken wire wrapped moss, locally grown moss. Those mossages I reuse for every wedding. I've never had to make really another one unless, basically the top of my cooler is just mossages up there, and I soak them overnight. The next day I let them drain out so that hopefully there's not too much like drippage happening around the ceremony. I'm still working on perfecting that. It's all about timing. And because of timing, that's why I try to get to the venue as soon as they'll let me in. And I've got everything with me so I can make it there. And I try to make sure that the installation is done as close to the time the guests show up as possible, so that we're not dealing with any wilting or anything, all of the variabilities that happen between the ceremony time, the guest time, and when someone completes something. There's so much that could happen between then. Windstorm, random hail. We live in the Pacific Northwest, so what I try to do is be on site so that I can guarantee that the service that the client paid me to do is what they paid for to the best of my ability. So if I'm there and I have my arms around it as much as possible, I can do my best to guarantee that. The other thing that I really like to do is make sure that I'm there for all of the photos, because so often a bride is like picking up their services, which we totally let them do, but then we see the photos and the bouquet is like turned sideways, it's upside down, the boutonniere is just fully flopped over, or it's pinned. Well, we know pinning problems is always a problem. But I want to make sure that if someone's paying, a good amount for their wedding flowers, that they're getting the full effect of it, not just like the daily experience, but that they're showcased in their photos as well. And so what I'll do is I'll stay on and I'll run around with the photographer and just like yell in the background, bouquet! Oh, okay. And then they'll put it forward. And that's really fun. And then in terms of the sustainability process, making sure that there is nothing left behind unless the couple wants it left behind. So we compost on site. I have a small cut garden at our greenhouse. Before I had a greenhouse and a cut garden, I still would take everything back, and then I had a local farm who I would drop all of my compost off with. So I know every step of the product that I'm selling and providing. I know its end life as well. Exactly. I'm able to compost what I'm selling because I know where it's being grown. Most of the time when a florist is buying, internationally, or they're buying through a middleman or a wholesaler, what is happening is those things are being, pumped up with bleaches, pesticides, all these different things, and they think it's compostable, throw it in their home compost, and then it's not. It is compostable in the larger metro industrial sense, but that process is also environmentally I guess stress. It's an environmental stressor in some ways. If you can compost, do compost, but I always say home composting is your best option. So I try to stay on until the end of the night. I definitely spend time in the middle trying to rest because, you know, by the end of the night, it's 11 o'clock at night or 2 a.m. We'll see. Usually I'm working with an amazing planner like you who makes sure that I get some food, and then I sit down and I go lay down somewhere, and then the ceremony happens and I get up and I rub my eyes and I grab all my stuff and I collect it and I go around to each space and make sure that there is nothing left behind that the venue would have to deal with. But also at the same time, since what I'm doing is compostable and sustainable and there's no immediate non-natural toxins, if there is a leaf or a flower left behind, I can safely say that nothing is leaching into that local watershed as a result of my work.
That's incredible. So this leads me to the most important, well, it's not the most important question, but it's the one I like hearing from the most. What is your biggest wedding ick?
Yeah.
What do you hate the most about wedding industry?
Yeah, I think what's beautiful about the wedding industry and weddings in general is that it is a culmination of everything that matters to you personally. And so in general, there's not a lot of icks. I would say my biggest ick usually has to do with things that are generally out of the client's control, which I'd say I wrote down when I was thinking about this. I remembered a wedding last year and I was like, yep, that's the one. I'd say venues with no air conditioning, especially summer wedding venues. It's dangerous for the vendors, the clients, and their guests. Even if it's an outdoor space, there should be some indoor space somewhere that has central air conditioning, not just for, yes, the safety of your vendors, the clients, and their guests, but also if you have a florist and you have flowers and it is the middle of summer, which is when weddings happen,
Right.
you have a space that those flowers can stay until it's immediately time, because the biggest effect that the environment has on the longevity of your flowers is temperature. My cooler is 39 degrees. You don't want your space to be 39 degrees, obviously,
No.
but 80 degrees is not okay for everybody.
Or like 90 degrees. Like we have all lived through so many of those days that are, yeah.
Last year, the venue that I'm referencing, the wedding florist that I was working with that day, she had a heat stroke. And so they weren't able to get their photos of or like the recordings of their speeches or anything. And unfortunately, the client didn't know this until the day of. And because she had been looking at the venue in the springtime, found out the bridal suite, the groom, everywhere was like no central air at all. So she had to bring in 3 separate, like she bought them at Costco, little air conditioners for the room. They didn't work at all. I looked insane. I looked insane to the point that the bride asked me if I wanted to take a shower.
I mean, listen, I have absolutely had days like that where I'll catch myself in the mirror and I'm like, oh, cool. That's just, yeah, that's what I've been doing for the last 8 hours, like 9, like how long though? How many hours have I looked like this? And I think that also just speaks to the larger point. Like we are, like our planet is warming and we are, not doing very much, if anything at all, as a society to prevent that or to stop it from happening or to reverse the effects of it happening. And our wedding season here is still such that we will be working on the hottest days of the year and likely anywhere else. I mean, unless you're like in Phoenix when it's like, you can't go outside, but like we will be working in the hottest days of the year. So I love that as an ick. I'm going to add that to my list of icks because that is now currently my top ick. Because yes, if you like even just a restroom trailer that has like something. Yes. Okay. So this leads me into my last question, which is how can we make our industry better?
Sure. So, yeah, I mean, I've got a long list on how the floral industry can be better, and I've listed it out everywhere, and everyone's welcome to see it on my website and elsewhere. But I would say the number one thing is banning flower foam. It's got to happen. It's got to happen. And since there's so many, I think that what encapsulates all of it is just asking more questions of all of the vendors that we have, including the venues, asking the venues if they have air conditioning, like asking your florist, all of the questions that I talked about earlier. Yeah, I think just more communication, more questioning, definitely booking as early as possible. I'd say this year we're seeing a lot of, at least at my shop, a lot of last minute weddings this year. And it sucks to have to say no. And, and I'd say if you can't find a sustainable floral alternative for a vendor, I'd say start looking at your local farms and farmers. A lot of them know how to do floral design. Ask them. They might even be a cheaper alternative. And I'd say just try to trust your florist to the best of your ability. I mean, I don't know about other people, but at least for me, like I've never had an issue with people not trusting me, but it's worked out for everyone involved, but that's just our shop. So
I love that. And I think the thing that it brings up to me too is just like being more cognizant of the entire process. So the end life of all of those things. I mean, I think I like that is something that like I'm trying to apply in my own life. Like, how do I get my food? Who gets me my food? And how do I support the folks that are getting me the things that I need to live? And so I think it's the same idea, right? Like just being more invested in asking questions and caring about what the not just the product, because you can have both. I think a lot of folks think that you maybe don't necessarily get the same end result if you're going some of these other avenues, but that's not true. You get the same result, but you're just being more invested in the process through which you are getting it.
Right.
Oh my gosh. Well, thank you so much for coming on, Lynsea. This has been so nice. Lastly, I really want you to tell me how folks can find you, how they can support, how they can follow you, all of that good stuff.
Sure. Thank you so much. This has been great. And I want to do more. My goal for the future of my career is to do more things like this. So I was so excited when you reached out. This is awesome. And you can reach me on Instagram at Coy_and_co. I'm also on TikTok and I'm loving it. So join me on TikTok. We're having a good time. You can also find our website, coycopdx.com. We've got an online store. We have flower subscriptions, which is super fun. And yeah, I'd say the only thing, the hardest way to get a hold of me would be phone calls, but I think that's the case for any millennial working these days.
Listen, if you're a person who is using phone calls, I can't do it. Like if my best friend will call me and if she's listening, this is how I'm going to test her to